Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. If this is your first time listening, I'll give you some quick background on the podcast. I live in Colorado and work as a Rocky Mountain ranch broker and as a land conservation consultant. Personally, almost all of my hobbies and interests revolve around life in the American West. I spend as much time as possible outdoors, running long distances, climbing mountains, catching fish, shooting birds, and when I do need to rest, I usually do so while reading books about the history of the American West. So I started the Mountain and Prairie Podcast as an excuse to dig even deeper into my obsession with the region. The purpose of the podcast is to spotlight the innovative and creative individuals who are helping to shape the future of the American West. From ranchers to writers, conservationists to entrepreneurs, athletes to artists, there's no shortage of fascinating characters whose careers are making this area such a special place to live, work, and play. I hope you'll enjoy listening to these conversations as much as I enjoyed having them. But before we get started, I want to thank Mountain Khakis for sponsoring this episode. Mountain Khakis is one of the top outdoor apparel brands on the market today, and for the last 10 years, I've decked myself head to toe in their pants, shirts, shorts, hats, and jeans. When I moved out west in 2005 and started working as a ranch broker in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, I learned very, very quickly that I needed clothing that was professional looking but also durable and rugged. After ripping a good number of pants to shreds on barbed wire fences, I finally discovered Mountain Khakis' original mountain pants. They had the durability of Carhartt's, but they were appropriate to wear in any situation with any of my clients. And these clients range from fifth-generation ranchers all the way to high-powered CEOs who fly in on a private jet. So I really do think they're the perfect clothing for life in the West. They're versatile, durable, stylish, and timeless. You can check them out at mountainkhakis.com or on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just type in @mountainkhakis. Thanks. So my guest today is Spencer Williams. Spencer started out as a river guide in Colorado's Upper Arkansas River Valley. Those experiences guiding ultimately led him to go to law school and become a water rights attorney. He now works for Ponderosa Advisors, a consulting firm that works with clients to understand water rights and water markets, among other things. He's also spending a good bit of his time working with their new online platform, WaterSage, which is a program that's helping to streamline water rights research across several states. I use it almost every day in my work, and I really can't say enough good things about it. It really is a game changer when it comes to understanding water rights and researching water on ranches or other properties throughout the West. I wanted to have Spencer on the podcast because I'm always amazed by how many highly educated, highly engaged, and curious people I meet who have no understanding of water, water rights, or the importance of water in the West. And when I say no understanding, that's not an exaggeration. I mean zero, absolutely no understanding at all. It's always been very, very amazing and kind of alarming, really. So in this episode, we cover a wide range of subjects. We talk about the very basics of water in the West. What is a water right? How can water rights be transferred? How can you separate water from the land? We talk about water as an investment and how investors are putting big money into buying up water rights across the Rocky Mountains. We talk about what sorts of due diligence ranch buyers should do if a ranch that they're looking at has water rights associated with it. And we talk about his current work with both Ponderosa and WaterSage, as well as tell some stories from his days as a river guide. We talk about some of his favorite books, his favorite locations in the West, and a ton of other interesting topics. I really enjoyed chatting with Spencer, and I think this conversation will serve as a great primer for anyone interested in learning more about water in the West. Thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoy. All right, awesome. Well, we are going.
Let's do it.
So thanks for doing this.
No problem. That's great.
Yeah. So I guess the first question I would have for you is when you meet somebody at a networking event or at anywhere, a party, and they ask you what you do for a living, what do you tell them?
It depends on how interested they seem and how much time we have.
Yeah.
If it's quick, I'll just say that I work in water rights, or I'm a water rights consultant. If they have, if we're actually having a long conversation, I'll tell them, I'm a water rights lawyer by trade, but I do water market work now, and we do part of that through a software platform. Mm-hmm. So it's a mouthful.
But keep watching until make sure their eyes aren't glazing over.
Exactly, and it can happen quick. But we're a consulting firm that's always used software. So we're in our own software, and with what we're doing now, we're a little software company too. Mm-hmm. So it's diverse.
So I want to get into real detail on Water Sage kind of after we talk about water rights in general.
Sure.
But can you just kind of give an overview of the consulting work you do with water and then Water Sage? And you don't have to go into too much detail because we'll dig into it.
Yeah, we'll do it quick. So our firm, Ponderosa Advisors, has always been about understanding opaque markets, mm-hmm. And that's the water rights consulting aspect that we really focus on. So we'll do a lot in kind of in the market space, everything from basic due diligence, market assessments, answering questions about liquidity and things like that. All the way up to brokerage in certain situations.
So selling that water rights.
Yep, water rights themselves, and we focus just on water rights. And then we also have this program called Water Sage. Water Sage, I say it's like a combination between Google Maps and Westlaw for water rights, and we'll get into that. But it's a great tool, and we use it for our work, but we also license that to others to do all sorts of kind of work in the water business.
Yeah, that sounds great. And as I'll mention a million times, we use it. I use it in my work in ranch brokerage and love it.
Great.
And so I guess probably before we go any further, I'd like to just kind of do like a water rights 101 discussion, because what I've found in living out here is that people who aren't directly related either to water law or agriculture or somehow related to land in the West, they really have no understanding of water rights. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of confusion, and it's interesting because I would say it's one of the most important issues that Colorado and the West is going to be facing in the coming generation, but nobody has any understanding of what water rights means. I mean, they think it means a well permit, or they think it means taking water out of the stream to bottle it up and sell it to Dasani or whatever.
Right.
And so if you could just kind of give us high level water rights 101, basically, what is a water right, just some history on it,
absolutely.
As much detail as you can.
Absolutely. It's a unique system, and the first bedrock principle that helps guide it is really our hydrology in the West, and to boil it down, there's just not much water, and so we had to develop a system to allocate a scarce resource. Because it would not work for all of us to just fight for whatever piece we thought we needed. And there's stories of that. You've got some great old stories from Colorado about some fights and some near fights that happened over water.
I'll tell you, when I first moved to Wyoming in 2005 from North Carolina, I'd been there a week, and I read an article in the newspaper about these two 80-year-old men who had both been thrown in prison or in jail because one of them had been sneaking out at night to irrigate his field and stealing the other guy's water. And the guy who was being stolen from went after the other old man with a shovel.
Right.
And they first they went to the hospital, then they went to jail. And so that was my first introduction to water in the West. There's something here.
There's this old story, the Union Colony outside Greeley, this is in like the 1850s or 60s, was this utopian concept, but it was one of the first communities that was going to irrigate the plains and establish a farming community. And as the story goes, some of the guys peeled off and went up to Fort Collins and started a town there, and they built a big old irrigation ditch and started diverting all of the water. Well, the guys down at the Union Colony, downriver, they didn't have any water then, but they were then claiming, and this is where the premise, the foundational principle of water rights comes into play, but they were claiming, well, we were here first, therefore we're entitled to the water even though you're upstream of me.
Yep.
And they all met at a schoolhouse down in Greeley somewhere, and so the story goes, the crowds are outside the schoolhouse with shotguns and pitchforks and torches while these few men are in the schoolhouse trying to negotiate this deal.
Yep.
But what came of that was the enforcement of this first in time, first in right principle. And I'll get to that, and I'll circle back to the beginning, the basic concept is that water use in the West, and particularly in Colorado, is a property right. It is something that I can buy and sell. In Colorado, it can be severed from the land. One of the key distinctions is it's a right to use that water. That means that if I'm irrigating a certain 40 acres for a certain purpose, the right that I have that's transferable is the right to divert that water and use it on that land. I don't have the right to just divert that water and throw it in trucks and wait until a market arises for it. And that's the concept of beneficial use. The right to use water is that property right. It's not the right to just store water up until you're ready to sell it. And it is transferable. I mean, it's conveyed by deed, like real estate. There's something else called a mutual ditch company, which is just a corporate ownership of the same type of right, and you transfer that interest like you would a stock certificate in any other company. But I think what bothers people, though, when you're coming from somewhere else, is you buy land or you're on land somewhere, and it's just kind of there's something natural to say, well, water's flowing through my land, therefore I must have some right to use it, as is the case in most of the eastern U.S., and that's just not the case in Colorado. You could have plenty of water flowing right through your property with zero right at all to use any amount of that water, and that's because of the water rights system.
And so you mentioned the water can be severed from the land. Can you explain that?
Sure.
That's something that people always seem to get hung up on.
Sure. So, if you go back, just to set it up, the large majority of the water use in Colorado is in agriculture, and it's been in that way for a long time. We settled Colorado as an agricultural state. There are some older rights in mining. That's because people came here first to mine. But for the agricultural example, those rights have been used on certain parcels of land, for generations. What can happen, though, is that water right that provides the water to that land can be sold independently. Now, all new water rights and any change to a water, it has to go through the water court. In Colorado, it's a unique system to Colorado. We have 7 water courts, and to change that water to a use besides irrigation, you have to go to water court and prove to the court that you're not going to hurt anyone else's water rights by making that change. But you're in no way precluded from buying the water right, conveyed to you by deed, going to water court, getting the change, and then using it almost anywhere else. It's happened here in the Front Range. A large number of the cities have bought up agricultural water rights and changed them, and now instead of being diverted in the so-and-so ditch onto that land, they're diverted into the city pipeline, city wastewater treatment, or water treatment to provide drinking water.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but and every one of these cases is unbelievably complicated and nuanced, but in general, so in the early 1900s, late 1800s, if you were to sell one water right to another person, generally it was probably somebody had some dry land, somebody else upstream had some irrigated meadows. You buy their water rights, they have to quit irrigating their meadow, you get to irrigate yours.
Yeah, that's certainly a way that it could have happened. And a lot of those just traded with the property too. You realize that in Colorado they can trade with the property, but there's just nothing legally speaking that's permanently tying them to the property. You can sever those from the real estate. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the early trades were probably farmer to farmer. You've got more water than you need. I don't have any, so I'll buy your right from you. And that especially became true once we diverted all the water in Colorado. Once we all the water in Colorado got tied up in water rights, which that's the way it is now for the large majority of the state. Every drop of water that comes out of the state is allocated in some way to a water right.
Yep. So, and so now you were talking about municipalities using the water. So now what's happening a lot is we've got this population boom along the Front Range. Municipalities are going to ranchers and they're saying, "Can we buy your water rights?"
Yep.
And then so the ranchers end up drying up their meadows, and then that water flows down the stream and then comes to Denver, where we can use it for drinking water.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
And that's been happening on a small scale for a really long time.
Yep.
But on a larger scale, kind of since the 70s, from what I understand. And it's kind of the market acting. Like I said, it's a property right, can be bought and sold, and there's a municipal demand, and the supply is locked up in agriculture, and there's been those times in the last 50 years where that market will function to transfer that water from one use to economically speaking at least another highest and best use for that water.
Yep.
Now that's that's purely speaking from an economic standpoint. There's a lot more that informs that conversation now.
Yep.
In terms of what our state values and the landscapes that we value.
So one question that I get a lot from people looking to buy a ranch, or confusion that I always see, is that there's a confusion between having a well on your property, like a domestic well for your house, and having water rights.
Yep.
So, for example, if I have a ranch and it doesn't have, there are no water rights associated with it, which means no irrigated meadows.
Right.
Somebody will say, well, that means I can't have a well for my house. And so can you explain the difference there?
Absolutely. There's something called an exempt well. And all you have to do to obtain one of these exempt wells is get the permit from the state engineer's office. The state engineer is the entity that administers all of the water rights in the state, but also some of these other water-related things like these domestic well permits. But they're exempt. They're exempt from the water rights system. And so I think, and I always have to look it back up, but it's a domestic only use, less than 15 gallons per minute, or I think if you're on like 30 acre lots or more, it can be a well. I still think it's about 15 GPM, but you can irrigate so much lawn and have a domestic use, water 1 or 2 horses or something like that. And that's a policy thing. I don't think the water rights system was ever intended to deprive individuals of drinking water.
Sure.
And the amount of water being used for those uses is relatively small, all things considered. And so, your well permit, that's a regulatory approved structure that the state values and says we don't want the water rights system to interfere with.
And it's not really a water right because you don't own it. It's not something that's transferred by deed. It's more you have a permit with the state of Colorado to use that water.
Yep.
And you can transfer the permits from owner to owner, but it's not a true water right.
Right.
Correct?
It's not. And the other thing, and we haven't talked about this priority idea yet, first in time, first in right, but it's a good time to bring it up because the critical component of a water right is its priority, and that's what I was talking about with the Union Colony and the Fort Collins settlement. The Union Colony was downstream, but they diverted that water earlier, and their claim was, well, listen, we were there first, so we deserve to get our water before Fort Collins upstream can divert their water. And that is the law now. I mean, that's how it works on every stream system for every water right in the state. And that's what defines value, because if you're an old water right, when the water level starts going down, be it a drought year or late summer every year, as the water level starts going down, the senior water rights are those that are guaranteed to continue to receive water. And that's a key element of a water right. Now, a well permit doesn't have a priority date, right? It operates outside of that system. And you're right. It's, you think of a well permit as a fixture or a permanent appurtenance. I mean, that water is for a very specified use. It's regulatorily approved on a property. And very different from a water right with a priority date that acts in that water right system.
And so just to explain that first in time, first in right, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but when there's a massive snowpack, we got a ton of snow, and there's no issue with drought, pretty much along a drainage, basically everybody who has water rights can use it in general.
Yeah,
then
oftentimes.
Yeah, usually. But that comes into play on a drought year when there's not enough water for everybody. So basically what happens is if you have a newer water right, you get cut off.
Exactly. We call it curtailed. But yeah, you get curtailed as the water level, as the water level goes down. The example is 10 CFS, cubic feet per second. That's how we measure water going through the stream. A cubic foot is about a basketball. So you imagine 10 CFS flowing down the stream and 3 water rights. The oldest is for 5 CFS, and the 2 newer water rights are both for 3 and 2 CFS. Well, 10 CFS in the stream, no problem. Everybody diverts their piece and everybody gets it. Let's say those newer water rights are upstream and that flow drops down to 6 CFS. Well, it's not like everybody takes their proportionate amount. That most junior can't divert anything. He's out of priority. The next most junior only gets that 1 CFS, even though he might be decreed or approved for 2 or 3. And that senior gets everything that's in the stream to meet his need, all 5 CFS. That's how that plays out. And that's been the law in Colorado since statehood.
Well, I think that kind of segues into something that I think would be useful to talk about for people who are looking to buy ranches.
Sure.
And I'm not talking about a 30,000 acre massive working ranch, but somebody say they want to buy 500 acres.
Yeah.
And they want 500 acres with some water right component.
Sure.
Obviously, if you get deep into the due diligence, you want to either hire you guys to look at it or go through their own attorney to look at it. But are there any kind of general rules of thumb that you as a water rights attorney would recommend buyers, just kind of a checklist they go through to get a good idea of exactly what they're looking at?
Absolutely.
And anything to avoid? Absolutely.
There's a few things. You want to work on understanding the priority of your water right. But why that really matters is it affects your ability to divert wet water for your use. And if you're talking about a ranch like you described, that water could be valuable for a number of reasons. Perhaps you're actually running cattle, and you're growing hay, or you're irrigating pasture. It might be for that use. If you're not, it's an aesthetic amenity. I mean, a green meadow is valuable because it's aesthetically pleasing. On the other end, anyone that's got trout ponds and things like that, usually they're relying on a changed old irrigation water right to do that. But what you want to make sure of is that water right has the ability to deliver water to continue that use. And the first thing that I would check is diversion records. For a lot of the water rights in the state, you can call the Division of Water Resources, something that we can find for you, or you can use the program that we have. But these folks have been reporting how much water they've diverted in each month of the irrigation season. And those records are great because, with a little bit of guidance, you can say, well, what were the low water years, the drought years, what were the high water years? And let's look. You can see in April of every year, we diverted, 100 acre feet or whatever it might be. We can see that maybe in August, diversions stop every year. Well, what that probably means is a more junior water right. Because as water levels go down towards the end of the summer, natural water levels, those senior rights are taking water. Now, you might look at it and see diversions clear, April through October. And that's probably indicative of a more senior water right. Especially if you see those diversions flatten out towards the end of the season. That means that that right is probably relatively senior and has the ability to capture remaining water in the system through the late season. So once you've done that, you kind of say, well, here's the wet water delivered. From there, you can actually go in and look at its priority. We can help with that. The local water commissioners are great resources for that. You can find their information on the state's website, and there's one for almost every sub-basin in the state, and they're the local experts, and they'll tell you a whole lot about the priority of that water right. So,
and another thing that Water Sage I think really helps with, Water Sage allows you to have all those records on one screen in front of you. You just click on the water right on the map, and it shows you all the diversion records, which are great. But one important thing that we hadn't talked about is non-use. And if you could explain non-use and what happens there.
Like we said in the beginning, it's a right to use water, and if you're not using it, you risk what's called abandonment. And any water right that can be proven that it wasn't used for 10 years is kind of statutorily abandoned. Now, you have to go through a process to either prove that you didn't intend to abandon it, or the state has to show that you did in most situations. But that's an expensive process. And so that's why, again, it's those diversion records really matter. If you can't find diversion records, if you've got diversion, I'd be even more. If you can't find them, that could be just someone not reporting. Mm-hmm. But if you've got diversion records straight through the 80s, let's say, and then all of a sudden nothing, that's a reason for concern.
Would it be a reason for concern, people not reporting? Because if you're not reporting, there's no record.
More and more it is. More and more the state engineer is taking a position that to protect your water rights, you have to have measuring devices installed to actually show how much water you're using. You've got to be reporting those numbers. Yep. That's more and more important as time goes on. Now, I don't see, particularly in some of these agricultural settings, that being a total red flag yet, but I would recommend anybody buying water rights to keep the best records they can to comply with those requirements. So then, there's actual abandonment lists, and you can check those yourself. We can check them for you. That kind of information is available in Water Sage too. But every 10 years they publish a list of those rights that they believe are abandoned, and that triggers that process. So that's another great thing to check and make sure you've not been on the abandonment list at any time.
And generally, whenever I've seen that come up as an issue, it's with ranches that have been in the same family for generations.
Yep.
And because usually if a ranch has changed hands, within the last 10 years, somebody has checked that out.
Yep.
And they've made sure that everything is in line as it should be. But some of these ranches that have been in the same family for 40 years, somebody's been sloppy with the record keeping or hasn't done it as they were supposed to, and they think they have this water right, and maybe they use it some, maybe they don't, but they're charging a certain price for that water right, but you need to make sure you're actually going to get it.
Absolutely, and water administration has changed a lot in the last 50, 60 years. And a system that was a lot of word of mouth, a lot of handshake deals, a lot of agreements over the table has changed, and it's not that anymore. Mm-hmm. It's administered much more closely. So someone that was used to the way it was done in the 40s and 50s and 60s, it's become very different. Kind of the 70s forward.
Well, I think it's becoming a lot more valuable, and like any asset, in the old days. It's like land. There's plenty of land, no big deal, and there's plenty of water for everybody. But now it's become clear that there simply isn't enough water, and so they're tightening it up.
Yep.
And I think we were talking about this just before we started recording, but you're seeing a lot of these groups come in that are interested in buying water rights as an investment. Mm-hmm. Big money, some institutional money coming in, looking at water as the next big thing.
Absolutely.
And you think basic supply and demand tells you it is going to be, but there's a rule, at least in Colorado, that prevents people from speculating in water. So can you speak to how people are using water as an investment vehicle without crossing into speculation?
Sure. There's a doctrine called the anti-speculation doctrine, and the examples that I think of are cases where someone has gone to water court to change some water rights, and typically they own a large agricultural portfolio of some kind, and they go to water court to change it for municipal use. Well, if you don't come to water court with signed commitments for the purchase of that water from a city, then you're very likely not going to get through water court. Because they would call that speculative. They would say you're changing it to a speculative use, and that's always been contrary to law in Colorado. And the point is that we want to utilize the waters of the state. We really want to put that water to use to support, these days it's our agricultural economy, our recreation economy, the environment that makes those things both valuable. I mean, on and on and on. So it plays out in the water court perspective. Now, it doesn't prohibit purchasing water rights. So what's been going on in the investment space is people recognizing that the water rights are in short supply, that a market exists, and so they've been investing in water-rich properties. It's my opinion that the payout of those is uncertain. And I think there's a lot of great indicators out there to say that water will become valuable. But what you have to really be focused on is what's the market? And if there isn't an existing market, what's the possible market that's going to materialize for that? And then when it does, how will you deliver your water to that market? And the moment you start talking about pipelines or exchanges or anything like that, then you need to be pretty serious about how you're going to pencil that deal. Because it's just a lot of money to get those things done. Now, it's different in a place where all you have to do is stop diverting and let it flow downriver. But I think that the perspective has been, from kind of the investment community, is we're going to buy water rights either in the development path, we're going to buy water rights in basins that are feeling pressures, and we're kind of in a waiting game to see that market come to life, to be able to monetize that water value. So that's one perspective. The other piece of it, and people are doing this as well, is just realizing that the benefits that water provides on a piece of land will appreciate themselves. I don't know if you see this on ranches, but the value of that green meadow. They're basically just saying, listen, that itself is going to get more and more valuable over time because there's going to be less and less of it. Some guys investing in farmland saying, productive farmland that's underpinned by valuable water rights, that itself is going to get more and more scarce and therefore much more valuable. It's kind of a couple ways that I think people are looking at that right now.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think one thing that prevents the average investor, say somebody's got $10 million and they want to put it into a land and water deal, what prevents them from being able to just buy it, hold on to it, and then sell it at a big flip it years later is that it's just so unbelievably complicated. And so we're seeing the people that we're seeing that are really serious about it have a background in water law, because this is the last number I heard, but to convert 1 acre foot of water in agricultural use to a municipal use is $100,000 in legal fees per acre foot. Is that about, in that area? Total
change case for a big one, I think probably starts at a couple $100,000 and could get more expensive from there.
So you got to have scale, and you got to know what you're doing. And so the people who can do it and not incur that huge expense are the ones that have a background in water law and can do it themselves.
Sure, and I think that's one. I always tell people, if you want in kind of the investment game in water rights, how it's kind of materializing right now, you need to have a fair amount, quite a bit actually, of your own money and be really good at farming. And that's because you're going to be making money farming. You need to be able to make enough money farming until the market materializes. And sometimes that'll be fast. If you're buying right in the development path, that could be quicker. But any of these bigger deals, I think it's a longer term play, which I think likely will pay off for a lot of people at some point. But the question is when. And you need to be ready to farm that ground. Until you get there.
Well, one reason I wanted to do this podcast in general is because all the people I meet out west and who are either involved in conservation or water or sports or whatever, everything we do out here, there's so many people that are really, really interesting and pretty funny. So you need to tell some jokes. No, but I think your background is really interesting because you're not from here originally.
Yep.
You're a lawyer, but you were also a river guide.
Yep.
You worked for the government for a while. So can you kind of give me your background, or give everybody else?
Sure.
I know most of it, but
Sure.
how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I more or less I'm really from Texas, and went to Texas A&M, and I never liked Texas that much when I lived there, and I left, and I love it more every day. But I'm glad to live in Colorado, no doubt. No, I was in college and looking for something different to do, and I had a fraternity brother who was a whitewater rafting guide, and I didn't know him that well, but he said, it's a great job, you should give it a shot. So he had a connection with the company he worked for, and so I applied for a job and got it, and sight unseen, drove up through Texas to Buena Vista, Colorado, and had a job as a rafting guide, and it was great fun.
Was that during college?
That was when I was in college.
Yeah.
It's it's one of those great jobs. You never have all downhill from there.
Kind
of a thing. But it's the Arkansas River. It's a great place to be a guide because the volume of trips is huge. But it's also a beautiful. Browns Canyon's a beautiful place, and the whole Upper Arkansas Valley is a beautiful, beautiful place. And so I just had the privilege to spend about 4 years, on the river every day, guiding trips, and everything from families to bachelor parties to buddies, and everything in between. Just spending every day on the river, and a part of that we did backpacking trips too. So
God, I love the Arkansas River. I may have told you that when I was in high school, they sent us out here for a leadership retreat, and it was to the Arkansas River Valley.
Yep.
Right there, we did the rafting. We climbed a 14er, and that was my first taste of the West. I'd never been out west before.
Well,
and that was it. I mean, that's what planted the seed. That's why I'm here now.
The Upper Ark Valley it's my favorite place, probably, and it's because it's a mixture of a lot of things. It's been saved from a lot of the commercialization because there's not a major ski resort in the valley.
Yep.
You've got Monarch 50, 60 miles to the south. If you go over Tennessee Pass, you can get the Copper, or you can get over to Vail, but that's going to take you about an hour. And in the wintertime, those are can be hairy drives, and some people don't do it. But that valley there, it's just kind of been protected in a cool way. The river community is a great community. There are they call it the Banana Belt to the Upper Ark Valley, and that's because just the way the weather patterns work, the valley itself stays relatively temperate for Colorado, at least through the winter. But to me, that just kind of feels like Colorado. It's almost like a feeling of the plains. You've still got some really big cattle and hay ranches up in the valley. And then you've got the recreation, but then you're right at the base of the Collegiate Peaks. So I always say Mount Princeton, right? You're coming over Trout Creek past, down into town, and a mountain. No mountain looks as much like a mountain should as Mount Princeton.
I think the exact same
going
thing.
valley floor straight to the top.
Yep.
And it's just a magical place.
It is.
Place that I love. So anyways, I was a kid from Texas, and driving, I remember, coming off at Walsenburg and driving up by the wet mountains up through that valley right there, and coming up through Salida and BB, and thinking, wow, this is more than I expected.
Yeah.
And then, I played on the river for about 4 years. Met my wife there, all sorts of great stuff. So that was my first Colorado experience, and it's all downhill from there.
Yeah, my dream used to be a river guide. I mean, that just seems really cool, and that river will rip through there.
Well, the Arkansas is great because at runoff, Browns Canyon can become a pretty intense trip. But then late season, it's a pretty mellow trip, and so just the difference in that is awesome. And it's a really great way. I kind of got to learn about hydrology that way, and unintended, but just to understand how the rivers work in Colorado, and I kind of got the hard knocks education as a raft guide, but it was an education nonetheless, and it was actually really helpful for me working in water to have that experience.
That's what I was going to ask. So do you link your time as a river guide to water law and now what you're doing with Water Sage? And
I absolutely do. And for me, it's just loving the beginning was just loving the landscape and loving how the river kind of defines that landscape. So that was the first part. But then some little thing, on the Arkansas, as a raft guide, you don't know much about water use outside of the industry you're in, but you do know that August 15th every year, flow goes from about 700 CFS down to about 400 CFS, and it's like in a day or two.
Yep.
And that's because of flow management based on water rights use on the Arkansas, and that intrigued me. I kind of realized that was a thing.
Yep.
And that's kind of what led me to.
So explain exactly what was happening there.
Yeah, it's a program called the Voluntary Flow Management Program, and on the Arkansas, up high in the mountains, there are a number of reservoirs, Twin Lakes and Turquoise Reservoir, and Turquoise particularly is a component of the Frying Pan Arkansas project that brings water from above Aspen over the Continental Divide, and it's supplemental water that helps provide water to a bunch of farms down on the plains, as well as cities and industry down there. And they pull all that water over the divide and they keep it up in that high mountain reservoir. And they do that because you lose less water the higher up you are, less evaporation.
Yep.
But they have to deliver all that water down to its use. Now it gets stored in Pueblo Reservoir down in Pueblo, and that's kind of the holding tank to get it used. But they have to, and there's some other conveyances like that happen on that stretch. But basically the issue is at some point every year they're going to take the water up in Turquoise and Twin Lakes and get it down to Pueblo. Mm-hmm. And what they said is, and this came out of some litigation and things like that, but some people agreed, listen, if we can move that water from point A up high to point B down low and provide some benefits to some other industries, then let's do it. So they manage those flows both to keep the rafting industry afloat through mid-August, where natural flows wouldn't have that much water in there at that time, and to improve the fishery. And so they do some flow management during spawning times and things like that. And since then, the rafting industry has this benefit that even in bad years, they can depend on raftable flows through most of the season. And that keeps a lot of those businesses alive. And also from my understanding, the fishery has improved immensely in the last 15 or 20 years. Whirling disease was terrible on the upper arc, and it wiped out nearly all the rainbow trout fishery there. But it has since begun to recover. The brown trout fishery has just continued to improve. But I think it's in part because of this flow management that they've done in that part of the world.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting, but at least from my perspective, it seems to have been really valuable, and it meets a lot of different needs.
Yeah.
So.
One more question about river guiding. What was the craziest thing you ever saw happen when you were guiding?
Man, that's a good question. There's a lot of wild stuff that happens, some good, some bad. I had a bad habit. There was one spot on the river where more than once I would be the only one to fall out of my boat, right? And
were the clients still in the boat? Were the clients?
And all my clients would still be in the boat. And on more than one occasion, I was able to. I would fall out, get back in the boat, and get back to my seat, and all they would notice is that I was just soaking wet. and that happened more than once in a couple spots. Boats flip, and it's a dynamic environment. I'm grateful to not have any wild stories, because the really wild stories seem to turn bad pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's the thing. In the mountains or rivers, or there's a fine line between a crazy, funny story that you remember and tragedy.
I know.
So it's probably better to keep it.
It's so true. And you think about rafting as a guide. It's all fun and all games, and you hear this from like you're saying, you hear this from kind of alpinists and all people that have to manage risk, and you're really just a professional risk manager.
Oh yeah.
All the time, and so sometimes that kind of becomes the experience. But on private trips, the game changes a little bit, and I've done the canyon by moonlight more than once.
Have you really?
And some great fishing trips down there, and some things like that, which are really, really cool.
Have you ever read The Emerald Mile?
I got into it, but I didn't get through it.
I just finished it.
Yeah.
And my dad and I did a rafting trip down the Grand Canyon when I was in high school, and God, that book was so good, and I think it gives you good insight gave me good insight into the whole river guide community.
Yeah.
The tough guys, man.
They are tough guys.
I'm pretty familiar with, the mountain climbers, the runners, but that's just a whole nother level of being a tough guy.
Well,
and gals.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, the guys that've done it for a long time, they are their own breed for sure. For sure.
So I could talk about that stuff all day, but I want to talk about WaterSage, kind of the specifics of the program, because I really think it's an unbelievable tool, as you know, because at like networking events, I stand by your side and tell everybody how awesome it is.
I'm indebted.
Yeah, I need a cut. But yeah, so just if you can kind of talk more about the program, and then I'd love to hear. Yeah, just kind of tell me about the program and then how it came into existence. More about what it does, who uses it, all that kind of stuff.
No, absolutely. WaterSage, like I said earlier, it's kind of like Google Maps in that it's a map-based platform. It's all web-based. You go to watersage.com, you log in from there, and this map comes up, and through its functions, you can search and identify the locations of all the water rights in Colorado. In addition to that, we've got a large majority of the land parcels in Colorado, all of those permitted wells we were talking about, but also stream gauges, and we're continually adding data to the system. But finding water rights data and understanding water rights has always been really hard. And the state of Colorado does it. And there's a small group of key employees over at the Division of Water Resources that do an amazing job about getting all this data together. And categorizing this data and making it available in different ways. And that's been really good for the professional community to have access to that. But if you weren't a water rights professional previously, it was so hard to make any sense of that. And so our first goal was to condense all of that data into a non-technical system and make it usable to someone that probably interacts with water rights. You're a great example of that, right? I mean, water rights are important probably for every deal that comes across your desk. But at the same time, you're not working in a water rights specific, capacity. And so we wanted to create something for guys like you to be able to get in there, get some really good information about what they're looking at so they could start to make good decisions about water rights issues. And that's what it is. It's non-technical. It's all the data. It's easy to use, but it's also thorough. And we've seen, the ranch brokerage community was one of the first big communities to buy in. Since then, we have federal, state, and local government clients, water providers, water rights lawyers and engineers, conservation groups. I mean, it's really expanded to anyone that is either working with that data consistently or needs access and comprehension of that data, but otherwise doesn't either have the time or kind of the repetitive need that would push them to learn kind of the more complex ways to use it.
Well, it seems like a lot of one of the biggest benefits in my line of work is that you take this unbelievably complicated and hard to use system and boil it down into basically a point and click, easy to use, as things should be now on the internet. And in the past, any real issues with water rights, you had to hire a water rights attorney, and so you think you're paying a water rights attorney on an hourly basis to basically just do kind of grunt work, going through the clerical type work, going through the government systems and putting together this information. And so now all of a sudden I can do that in 5 minutes, whereas it used to be hours and thousands of dollars.
Absolutely. And we see that. I mean, there are tasks, that are always going to be really important to have an attorney or an engineer do, without question. But also, most people out here are smart people, and if they have the right resources, they can get a lot done themselves. And we believe WaterSage allows that. But then we also, we hear these stories of when you become educated and engaged in the water rights kind of issues that are going on. When you go to your attorney, you're coming with concise questions. You're coming with problems you've recognized, and you're allowing them the opportunity to do the real legal work, or go to the water rights engineer and do the real engineering work, and to work kind of much more collaboratively than was previously possible. And we see that as a really good thing for the industry as a whole. But it's something that we really do like to promote, and we see happen because folks are able to use WaterSage.
Yeah, I think, in our business, when I first started using it, I thought, this is a huge competitive advantage. We'll know more about the water than our competitors. And
right.
But then I was working on a deal with another broker at a different ranch brokerage firm that also uses Water Sage, and I found that it allowed us just to cut through a lot of the kind of nonsense that or lack of information, and he had the same information that I had, and we were both on the same page, and it just made the whole thing go a lot more smoothly than it used to. Well, or then it would have gone if I had all that info and he hadn't had anything.
Yeah.
And so I think it cuts out a lot of the inefficiencies in my business. It cuts out inefficiencies in the deal, and so I'd imagine it's the exact same for conservation organizations who are working with limited budgets, limited time.
For sure, and for a conservation organization, they are such a key stakeholder in that piece of land. The primary stakeholder is that landowner, without question. But even for that landowner, sometimes that individual will cease to be the person stewarding that land. Now, the conservation organization, on the other hand, has taken on the responsibility to steward that land in perpetuity.
Yeah, forever.
And so they are such an important stakeholder in that process. And so exactly for them, they're saying we realize the water as a key and important component. So we want to be educated.
Yep.
We want to understand it for ourselves. We want to engage with our professionals well, because we know how important it is. So
another thing I've found with Water Sage is that it's relatively expensive compared to a lot of online platforms, but if you're in this business of these high value ranches, it pays for itself very quickly, because you can get a really good idea of what's going on with the water within 10, 15, 20 minutes, whereas it used to be hours and hours and hours of research. And I think just being able to save that amount of time is worth so much for selfishly for my time, but then also for the client. The client is better off for that. And
absolutely.
You just provide better service.
You're providing value in your service without question. But from a brokerage perspective, and we see this in the water rights brokerage, your effective rate gets whittled down the more hours you're putting in to getting a deal closed, and the ability to get just as good of data but cut that time down absolutely is a benefit. We see our other users conceptualize the value in a lot of other ways. For our government clients, they're all overworked, and anything they can do to get more efficient, become more productive, and provide better product, is without question of value. When you get over to the professionals, there's a benefit to being comprehensive. The quality of your work gets better when you're not spending time maintaining large databases and disincentivized because you're having to query multiple databases and keep data up to date. We take on that burden so that you're just focusing on getting information, understanding, our users seem to very easily conceptualize the value that it provides. So
another benefit that I've found with it is that it's basically a GIS system of the entire state.
Yep.
And so where I used to, if I was researching landowners or trying to understand land ownership in a valley, if there are 3 or 4 counties that go along a valley, you have to go to 3 or 4 different county websites. Some of them are awful, some of them are good.
Right.
And you've got all the landowners on there as well, which is huge.
Absolutely. It's all there. I haven't seen anybody do it for this yet, but both as a raft guide and I guided some fly fishing too for a while. I was always checking stream flows for a host of reasons. So I'm waiting for some Water Sage user to be checking their favorite fishing holes and their favorite river stretches for stream flow information. And
that's a good idea. I haven't played around with that feature yet, but now
well, there you go. Maybe you're the guinea pig yet.
Yeah.
That's great.
So what's your plan? What's the future of Water Sage? What are you guys working on?
Yeah, so right now we're in Montana, Wyoming, Texas, and Colorado. And I think the long-term goal is to cover the entire western United States. And so we're thinking pretty seriously right now about the states that we take on next. In addition to that, in all of our states, there's it's really fun right now because we've got a great user base, a really diverse user base. And so we're going out to that user base and saying, how does it become better? What features would you like? Would help, solve more of the day-to-day problems you have doing this kind of work. And that's been really fun because we're getting some great input. So into this year, we're releasing what's our 3.0, our third iteration of WaterSage, and it's going to have a lot of functional improvements. It's going to have some data improvements. It's going to be easier to use. It's going to be better looking. I mean, it's going to be real exciting.
Nice.
And from a technical perspective, we're getting we use a Silverlight plugin right now, and we're getting off of that plugin. So any browser, any location, it'll just be much easier to use. As the future goes on, it's going to be continuing to listen to our clients and understand ways that we can make their jobs easier. But that's kind of what we're excited about as WaterSage grows.
That sounds great. And you guys are, at least with Murr Ranch Group, you guys have done 3 or 4 seminars for us on the best way to use it, and always asking for feedback. And so we've had a great experience. So one more kind of question about water, and then I've got some quick questions for you.
Absolutely.
We can wrap it up. What changes do you see occurring to water rights, water law in Colorado or the West in the next 20 years? Because I think there are 2 million more people moving here. There's not enough water. So what would you say is going to happen?
It's a great question, and there's so many demands placed on the resource right now, and those demands have changed. We have environmental demands now that are important. We have recreational demands. We have agricultural demands. We have growing municipal demands. I think what I would like to see is for the state to come together and to figure out how do we preserve the system that we have, and that is protect the property rights that currently exist, but then how do we at the same time innovate to allow more flexible use? I think it's exciting to think about allowing someone to a farmer to say, I want to lease a portion of my water to an in-stream flow, for an environmental need, or I want to provide water for a municipality on a temporary basis, but at the same time I want to keep my farmland viable. There's stuff coming out like that, and I think there's a long way to go with it, and I think the markets are nascent. I think that there's a lot of developments to happen, but I see it going that direction, and I'm excited to see I'll be excited to see how we can address the problem by honoring and respecting the system that's in place.
Yes.
So
it'll be interesting no matter what happens. So now I've just got a few more quick questions. Well, you don't have to answer them quickly, but you can.
Well, I probably should.
Yeah. So if you could recommend any books on water for somebody who's trying to dig a little deeper on this, are there any you would recommend? And then any of your other favorite books, just in general?
No, absolutely. From a technical perspective, there's a water law for non-lawyers that a guy named Andy Jones, and I think he's got a co-author on it, but they wrote, it's actually a great book. I'm a lawyer, and I like that book a lot.
Nice.
And I'd recommend that just from a technical perspective. The classic is Cadillac Desert. I have to be honest, I haven't read the whole thing. Sometimes when you work sometimes when you work in water all day, you're ready for something different at the end of the day. But by all accounts, that is the best history of how water use developed in the West. I read more fiction, and I'm a Steinbeck fan, but Steinbeck does a great job at giving a lot of really good history through narrative of the American West. And I think the poles are Grapes of Wrath on one end and East of Eden on the other. Grapes of Wrath is a very depressing story.
I haven't read it.
But very well written and a really good narrative about development of California and the Dust Bowl, and East of Eden is also a very good narrative about development of the West, but from a much different perspective. And I'd recommend them both. And East of Eden in particular is all about water. The first chapter is all about water.
Cool. So, I haven't read either of those.
Yeah, highly recommend it.
I'll have links to all these books on the webpage. Cool. Do you have any favorite documentaries? Doesn't have to be about water, but about anything.
when I watch documentaries, it's usually 30 for 30.
Yeah, those are good.
Of some kind.
I saw the one about Bo Jackson the other day. It's so good.
I watched the 85 Bears one, I think, recently.
Fab 5. That was good, too.
Yeah, they're all good. I'm trying to think of other documentaries. That's what comes to mind.
No, that works. So if you had to say your favorite location in the West, I'm guessing where you're going to say it is, but is there a certain valley, mountain, lake, anywhere?
Yeah, we've already said it. For me, it's Upper Oak Valley, Salida to even up to Leadville, and everything from the collegiates down to the Arc, and everything in between. Probably more sentimental for me than anything, but that's my spot.
Yeah, that's my spot too. You can do it all there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you could recommend one hike or one specific trip activity, say somebody's sitting in North Carolina planning to come out here this summer,
sure,
what would you recommend they do?
That's a great question. Staying on the same theme, I just say base camp out of Buena Vista, Colorado, or Salida, and just do everything that has to offer. Hike to a high mountain lake. There's 100 options. Raft to the Arkansas. Spend some time on the Continental Divide, and explore all the little towns in between. I mean, there's just a little bit of everything. Even if you're just car camping, and dispersed camping somewhere. I mean, that can be just as good as it gets.
People get so hung up on visiting national parks, and the reality is a lot of times national parks are just full of people and crowded, and you can go there and you've got more land, less people, higher mountains.
That's my feeling. I mean, there's some beautiful places in Rocky Mountain National Park, but I don't think that they're any more beautiful than some of my favorite spots in the collegiates. I'd point you to my spot. Not too many of you, though.
Yeah. And then, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing Colorado or the West in the future?
Yeah, I think it's all these multiple. I think Colorado is a great example of high demands on scarce resources, and that's everything from land to even our landscapes, to water and everything, and you're seeing very different kinds of people, state their interest in those scarce resources. And so I just think this is a testing ground to figure out how do we deal with urban growth, how do we deal with protection of our open space, of our agricultural heritage, how do we protect kind of our sporting history. Skiing now is, I love to ski, but it's changed. It's crowded. Getting up there is really hard, and I just think these are problems. I don't think the answer is closing the border. I think we should continue to invite people to come and be a part of our state. But I think that there's a huge opportunity, a challenge, but equally an opportunity to define what does it mean to be a Coloradan today, and learning how to invite people into that identity. I think that's important. Huge challenge, but I think it's incredibly important. And I'm excited to kind of see how that shakes out.
So if you could make a request of people that are listening, if there's a certain cause that you're passionate about or something you think they should understand more about the West that would help everybody, is there any specific thing that comes to mind that you would recommend people look into?
And this is just kind of more theory than anything else, but I think being in the West today, it's more important than ever to honestly consider the perspective of people that are on the other side of the table from you, and whether that's whether that's politically or on certain issues. I don't think we're going to solve any of our problems by sitting in our camps and not understanding. Everybody comes to the table with a really valid reason for the way they think something. And in water, that's true too. Whether you want the government to take over every water right in Colorado and provide them just for fish. There's a reason people have that perspective. And while we don't have to agree on everything, I think that we're going to actually get things done by finding ways to collaborate instead of litigating our way to marginal returns.
Yep.
I would say look at your opponent and try to understand why they think the way they do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I read a book recently, and they were talking about the history of the West and how if you look at communities over time, the ones that have been able to make it work with these limited resources, including water, are communities that share and that can collaborate with each other versus, which stands in stark contrast to the idea of rugged individualism.
Right.
I got my play. And so it's it's kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum, but when you're dealing with limited resources, there's no choice but collaborate.
I completely agree. Yeah. So
all right, so people can find you at watersage.com.
Yep, absolutely.
You're on LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff.
All the normal places. You can find out about us. Our company's Ponderosa Advisors, and WaterSage is the product, and ponderosa-advisors.com or watersage.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in any of this kind of stuff, feel free to reach out.
That was great. Thanks so much.
Ed, thank you. I really appreciate it.
So there you have it, Water Rights 101 with Spencer Williams. I really appreciate Spencer taking the time to come on the show and talk with us about this important subject, and I hope you found it to be valuable and learned a few things. It's an enormously complicated subject, but I think it's very important to at least dig in a little bit and try to get a basic understanding of it, because it's only going to become more and more important as the population grows here in Colorado and throughout the West. So thanks to Spencer. I appreciate the time. Thanks to Mountain Khakis for sponsoring. As always, if you have any questions, comments, ideas for future guests, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find me at mountainandprairie.com. All the links to my social media and all that kind of stuff is there. I'll look forward to the next episodes, and I will talk with you later.